He stared at the crumpled $10 bill in his hand as though it carried the weight of his entire world. The fridge back home was empty, the electricity bill was overdue, and the soles of his sneakers were worn thin from too many miles walked instead of bus rides taken. That single bill was supposed to stretch across hunger, survival, and pride. Yet as his stomach tightened, his eyes caught sight of someone else, a stranger, slouched near the diner window, clothes faded, eyes hollow, the kind of look that spoke of nights without shelter. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. His mind wrestled with the cruel arithmetic of survival. $10 meant one hot meal, a little comfort, maybe enough to quiet the ache in his body. But it also meant the difference between despair and dignity for someone who looked even worse off than him. Who gives away their last dollar when they barely have enough for themselves? Who risks everything on kindness? His fingers trembled as he glanced again at the stranger. Something in those weary eyes pulled him in, like a mirror showing where he could be tomorrow if luck slipped just a little further away. With a deep breath, he pushed the bill across the counter and whispered for the man's meal to be covered. He had no idea, standing there with nothing left in his pocket, that this small act would set in motion a chain of events that, within 48 hours, would flip his world upside down. He grew up in a world where $10 could mean the difference between holding on to hope and falling into despair. For some, $10 is loose change at the bottom of a bag, forgotten until laundry day. But for him, that bill was heavy, loaded with meaning, almost sacred. It wasn't just paper. It was meals skipped, bills unpaid, and countless small sacrifices woven together into a fragile attempt to stay afloat. His story begins in a cramped apartment, the kind where paint chips flake from the walls, and the hum of the refrigerator reminds you of the few items inside that barely qualify as food. Jamal was only 19, but life had already forced him to carry the weight of a man twice his age. His mother worked double shifts as a cleaner, her hands raw from chemicals, her feet aching from hours spent scrubbing floors that belonged to people who never once noticed her face. His father had left years ago, leaving behind echoes of broken promises and a boy who had to learn resilience too soon. Jamal carried not just his own dreams but the unspoken expectation that somehow he would be the one to rewrite the family's story. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, not because he wanted to, but because his body had learned to adjust when worry replaced rest. College was supposed to be his escape, his ticket to a different life, but textbooks came at a price, and scholarships only stretched so far. Tuition hung over his head like a storm cloud ready to break, and the part-time job at the grocery store barely covered the basics. Each paycheck was split into fractions, a little for rent, a little for utilities, some for food, and sometimes nothing left for himself. The weight of responsibility pressed harder than hunger ever could. He knew his mother counted on him, not just for the future but for the present, for moments when she needed help with the bills or when her exhaustion spilled over into silence. He quietly took on the role of comforter. Jamal wasn't just a student. He was a son, a caretaker, a dreamer, and a fighter. And with every role came sacrifices invisible to the outside world. Imagine standing in front of an empty fridge, stomach growling and seeing only a half-empty bottle of ketchup, a few slices of stale bread and water. Hunger doesn't just gnaw at your body, it chips away at your dignity, whispering that maybe you're not going to make it. Yet despite that, Jamal carried himself with quiet pride. He didn't want pity. He wanted an opportunity. Still, opportunity felt like a cruel game of chance, always one step out of reach. That week had been especially brutal. Bills piled on the counter, unopened letters from the utility company reminding him of deadlines already missed. His shoes, once bright white, had dulled into gray, soles cracked from walking miles to save bus fare. His backpack strap had snapped the week before, tied back together with a shoelace, a silent symbol of his persistence. And then there it was, $10. The last of what he had until the next paycheck. It sat in his pocket like both a lifeline and a curse. What do you do when everything you own boils down to a single bill? Do you cling to it, stretching it as far as possible, knowing it won't really last? Or do you risk it on something bigger, something that might not even benefit you at all? For Jamal, this wasn't just about hunger. This was about survival, about dignity, about the constant balancing act between sacrifice and necessity. He dreamed of something different, though. Late at night, when the city was quiet and his mother finally rested, Jamal would open his worn notebook and scribble ideas for the future. He envisioned founding a nonprofit for kids like himself, providing scholarships, mentorship, and a path out of the cycle. He wanted to prove that poverty didn't define destiny, that kindness could ripple outward and transform lives. But dreaming was free. Living cost money, and right now he had $10. Every choice felt like a test, a cruel puzzle with no correct answer. He could use it for food, a burger and fries, something warm to calm the ache in his stomach. He could save it for bus fare, sparing his feet another long walk across the city. Or he could tuck it away, an emergency fund so small it felt almost laughable. Yet, the thought of giving it away never seemed like a realistic option. How could it be when every penny mattered? But life has a way of presenting choices that test the deepest parts of our character. That evening, as Jamal walked past the diner, he noticed a man sitting by the window. His clothes were worn, his beard unkempt, his eyes tired. There was something in the way the stranger held himself, shoulders slumped, gaze fixed on the table, that reminded Jamal of his own reflection in darker moments. He paused, heart racing, as the $10 bill burned in his pocket. This is where the mind begins to battle itself. One voice whispers, "You can't afford this. That money is survival." Another voice, quieter but persistent, says, "What if this is your chance to be more than your circumstances?" The tug-of-war between fear and compassion is one we all know, but for Jamal, the stakes were life-defining. He stood there, caught between need and empathy, hunger and humanity. That $10 wasn't just money, he would later reflect. It was survival, or so I thought. And that's the paradox of sacrifice. You never really know in the moment whether it will lift you higher or drag you further down. The weight of that decision lingered as he hesitated at the diner door. Strangers passed by, some glancing at the homeless man, others pretending not to see him at all. Jamal's heartbeat quickened. He imagined walking away, keeping his money, filling his stomach, and numbing the ache of poverty for just one more day. He imagined the judgment of his mother, who would scold him for being reckless, for giving away what they didn't have to spare. But he also imagined something else. The look in the stranger's eyes if someone, anyone, saw him as human for once. And that vision cut deeper than hunger. What Jamal couldn't know, what no one could have guessed, was how this moment, this seemingly reckless choice, would unravel into something far greater. But suspense hung heavy. Would this act of kindness lead to regret, or would it prove to be the decision that redefined his entire future? In life, we are often asked to gamble without knowing the odds. Jamal's gamble was a $10 bill, placed on the belief that compassion mattered more than survival. And as he stood there, the diner lights glowing like a spotlight on his inner turmoil, the first chapter of his transformation quietly began. He looked up at the stranger sitting alone at the diner window, and Jamal's breath caught. The man's clothes were worn to the point of fragility. Faded jeans with threads peeling at the seams, a jacket that had clearly weathered more winters than anyone should endure, and shoes that had long since surrendered to countless steps on cold concrete. His hands rested on the table, knuckles white, not from anger but from the tension of carrying more than the world should demand. There was a quiet weight about him, a tiredness that wasn't just physical but etched deep into the lines of his face, in the creases around his eyes, and the set of his shoulders. Every detail spoke of struggle, of nights without sleep, of days spent invisible to the very world that passed him by. Jamal's fingers brushed the $10 bill in his pocket. The paper felt heavier than ever, loaded with the gravity of choice. His stomach growled, reminding him of its persistent, gnawing emptiness. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to save that last shred of security. Yet he couldn't. He found himself staring, mesmerized not by pity but by a connection, an unspoken recognition of shared hardship. For the briefest second, he felt as if he were looking into a mirror a reflection of what his own life might have been if luck hadn't tilted just slightly in his favor. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a pale glow over the stranger. Jamal noticed the man's eyes, dark and deep, tired yet strangely alert, as if they had witnessed both the cruelty and beauty of the world. There was something magnetic about them, an unspoken story embedded in that gaze. He couldn't look away. Who was this man? Why did it feel like he mattered so much, even though they had never met? Questions tumbled through Jamal's mind, mixing with doubt and a rising sense of urgency. He shifted his weight, torn between instinct and reason. The $10 bill burned in his pocket as if it could sense the dilemma. One voice in his head whispered, "You're risking everything. That money is all you have. Don't do this." Another, quieter but insistent, replied, "Sometimes giving is more than survival. It's proof that you still believe in something bigger." The internal conflict stretched out for moments that felt like hours. Sweat dampened his palms, heart hammering in rhythm with the gnawing hunger in his belly. Finally, Jamal stepped closer, each footfall heavy with anticipation and fear. The stranger looked up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. The man's lips curled into the faintest smile, tired but genuine, as if he understood the weight of Jamal's decision before it had even been made. Jamal's hand trembled as he placed the $10 bill on the table. It wasn't just money. It was hours of missed meals, the careful budget he had mapped out, the fragile promise of keeping himself afloat. He had given it all away in one single act. The stranger's eyes widened, a spark lighting up where exhaustion had settled. "Thank you," he said softly, the words carrying more weight than the currency itself. His voice had a calm, measured tone, almost familiar in a way Jamal couldn't place. There was something in that expression, a subtle hint that this interaction meant more than it appeared. Gratitude glimmered in the corners of his eyes. But so did something else, a quiet mystery, like the surface of a calm lake hiding something profound beneath. As Jamal stepped back, he felt an unexpected warmth spread through him. Hunger didn't vanish, bills weren't paid, and his shoes were still worn thin, but a sense of relief mingled with pride. He had chosen empathy over self-preservation, kindness over caution, and in doing so had proven to himself that his humanity was bigger than his circumstances. It was a fleeting moment of triumph, small yet monumental, like catching sunlight through storm clouds. But curiosity tugged relentlessly at the edges of his mind. Who was this man, really? There was something in the way he moved, in the deliberate calm of his gestures, that hinted at depth, at secrets carefully tucked away. Jamal found himself studying him surreptitiously, noticing the subtle details, the slight crease of his jacket, the faint glint of a chain at his neck, the way he held his cup of coffee as if it were a relic. Something about the stranger seemed deliberately understated, almost calculated and yet approachable. It was a paradox that Jamal couldn't resolve. As he walked away, Jamal felt the lingering weight of both his sacrifice and the unanswered questions. The diner's door closed behind him with a soft chime, cutting off the stranger from view, yet the image remained imprinted in his mind. The way those tired eyes had flicked up at him, the subtle nod of acknowledgement, the faintest hint of a smile. It was as if a door had opened, one he couldn't yet see the other side of. He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was a hinge moment. This pivot point could lead to something extraordinary or unexpectedly dangerous. For hours afterward, the $10 bill haunted him, not as money lost, but as a decision that had unlocked a chain of possibilities. That simple act of giving carried a resonance he hadn't anticipated, a silent echo that whispered promises of change. And deep inside, a question burned brighter than hunger. What if this small gesture wasn't just charity, but a catalyst for something far larger than either of them could imagine? Jamal's thoughts replayed the stranger's reaction again and again. There had been gratitude, yes, but beneath it an unspoken message, almost imperceptible, as if the man had recognized something in Jamal, a quality rare and valuable, one that could be nurtured or exploited. The intensity of the connection lingered, and Jamal began to wonder whether the stranger had chosen him as much as he had chosen the stranger. It was a subtle shift in perspective, a realization that sometimes the people we help are not passive recipients, but active participants in a story that's unfolding in ways we cannot predict. The night stretched long, and Jamal lay awake, stomach still growling, but heart strangely light. There was a newfound clarity that came with making such a deliberate act of generosity. He had tested the limits of his courage. He found them not lacking, had extended himself beyond immediate survival, and discovered an inner strength. And yet the sense of suspense remained, a quiet tension threaded through every thought. The stranger was not just a man in need, he was a puzzle, a mystery wrapped in human fragility, hinting at consequences and opportunities beyond Jamal's understanding. He realized that life often presents moments like this, tiny crossroads that seem insignificant at the time, but carry hidden weight. The $10 had been more than money. It had been a test of character, a seed of potential, a doorway into an unseen chapter. Jamal's decision, small on the surface, was already rippling outward in ways he could not yet see. And though he didn't know what lay ahead, he sensed the unmistakable thrill of possibility, that the smallest act of courage could be the first step toward a transformation beyond imagination. As he finally drifted into a restless sleep, Jamal clung to that feeling, the electric mix of hope and uncertainty. He had given away his last $10, yes. Still, in doing so, he had claimed something far more valuable, the awareness that he could act, that he could choose, and that sometimes the right decision was the one that scared you the most. The stranger's mysterious gaze lingered in his mind, a question mark that would not fade, a promise that this was only the beginning of a story neither of them yet fully understood. He stared at the empty plate in front of him, the gnawing ache in his stomach reminding him of the choice he had made just 2 days ago. That $10, the last money in his pocket, had been his lifeline, or so he had thought. Now each pang of hunger felt like a quiet accusation, whispering, "Did you really do the right thing?" The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, its emptiness echoing the emptiness he felt. He had promised himself that he would use that money for essentials. Bread, maybe some eggs, something to fill the hollow cavity inside, but instead, he had given it away. To a stranger, someone he barely knew, someone who had looked at him with tired eyes and worn-out clothes, and in that brief flickering moment seemed almost to plead for help. Even now, he could replay the hesitation, the tug-of-war in his chest between survival and compassion. His fingers had lingered over the crisp bill, tracing its edges as though he could read the future imprinted there. Every part of him had screamed to keep it, to protect what little he had left from the unrelenting tide of bills and responsibilities pressing in from all sides. And yet, he had made a choice that defied instinct, that defied fear, that defied logic. He had handed over the money with a shaky smile and a whispered, "Here, take this." The stranger had accepted it with wide eyes and a trembling nod, muttering thanks that sounded almost too sincere to be casual. There was a brief moment of connection, a nearly imperceptible spark that made him feel, for the first time that day, like he had done something meaningful. Relief had washed over him, warm and fleeting, like the sun breaking through a cloudy sky. But as he walked away, the reality of his own situation hit with double force. No money, no food, only the gnawing worry about what he would do next, what he would tell his family if they found out, how he would survive the next day. By the evening, whispers of doubt had begun to creep in. What had he done? Was he foolish to act with generosity when survival itself was hanging by a thread? His friends had been quick to comment, their words slicing through his confidence. "You gave away what you didn't even have?" they had asked, incredulity written across their faces. And even his younger siblings, innocent yet observant, had looked at him with questions in their eyes, questions that he couldn't answer. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down harder than ever. A silent, invisible fist tightening around his chest. Yet beneath the worry, beneath the hunger, there was a stubborn pulse of pride that refused to be extinguished. He had done something rare, something challenging, something that required more courage than he realized. He had chosen empathy over self-preservation, connection over isolation, humanity over convenience. It was a small act, a fleeting gesture. But in that act, he had proven to himself that he could be more than the sum of his circumstances. He could make decisions that reflected who he wanted to be, not just who the world assumed he was. Still, the next 48 hours were agonizing. Each minute stretched endlessly, dragging him through a labyrinth of fear and uncertainty. He avoided the fridge, afraid of the emptiness, fearful of facing the consequences of his generosity. He walked through the streets with a hollow feeling, seeing the world continue around him, indifferent and unyielding. Every shadow seemed to mock him, every passerby a silent reminder of the risks he had taken. He wondered if he had made the dumbest decision of his life, a mistake that would cost him more than he could afford to lose. He found himself questioning everything: what it meant to be responsible, what it meant to be good, what it meant to survive. Could he reconcile the hunger gnawing at his belly with the pride swelling in his chest? Could he believe that small acts of kindness could hold any real power in a world that seemed intent on crushing hope under its weight? The doubts were relentless, battering against him like waves against a fragile shore, threatening to wash away any trace of certainty. He had given away more than money. He had given away his sense of security, his carefully constructed sense of control. Yet even in the midst of this storm, he caught glimpses of clarity, moments when he remembered the stranger's eyes, the gratitude in a voice that trembled with sincerity. Those moments were like beacons in the dark, reminding him that courage often felt like fear, and that the growth path was rarely free of discomfort. He began to understand that sacrifice, true sacrifice, always carries uncertainty. And sometimes the most significant leaps of faith require leaving yourself exposed, vulnerable and unprotected, trusting that the world will respond, not necessarily immediately, not necessarily in ways you can foresee, but that it will react. By the second day, the hunger and doubt had fused into a strange, almost surreal tension. He moved through life in a haze of anticipation, waiting for a sign, a hint, a whisper of what might come. Every slight sound, every glance from a stranger, every ring of a phone felt loaded with possibility. The mind has a way of amplifying expectation, of turning minutes into hours, hours into eternities, and he felt each one with agonizing intensity. He clung to hope like a lifeline, though it seemed impossibly fragile, as if a single misstep could shatter it entirely. And yet, through all the uncertainty, a quiet transformation was underway. He was beginning to see that giving does not weaken, it strengthens. That fear and doubt are not enemies to be vanquished, but companions to be understood. That resilience is built not in comfort, but in the crucible of discomfort, where every decision carries weight, where every choice leaves a mark. He realized that his story was no longer just about surviving, but about becoming someone capable of hope, courage, and compassion even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Every pang of hunger, every whispered doubt, every pointed comment from friends or family, all of it became part of a larger narrative, one in which he was the protagonist, shaping his destiny not by circumstance alone, but by the character he displayed in the face of it. He understood that the waiting, the fear, and the sacrifice were not punishments but lessons, subtle, sometimes cruel, but necessary. He began to see that life has a way of testing generosity, stretching the fabric of trust and courage, and that the payoff is rarely immediate, often invisible, but always meaningful. Little did he know, as he went to bed on the second night with an empty stomach and a heart full of doubt, that the very act that had caused this torment, the giving of his last $10, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would flip his world upside down. The world has a mysterious way of honoring courage and kindness, of rewarding those who take risks for the sake of humanity. And when that reward arrived, it would come not as a fleeting moment of luck, but as a transformative force, reshaping the trajectory of a life that had seemed so constrained by hardship. He drifted into sleep with a restless heart, the last remnants of doubt mingling with a fragile hope. The hunger would pass. The uncertainty would continue, but the seed of something greater had been planted, invisible yet potent, in the very choice he had made. And in just 48 hours, everything would change. The morning sun had barely pierced the horizon when he heard the faint roar of an engine outside. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was just another car passing by, another distraction in a world that had been so indifferent to him. But then the sound lingered, and he noticed a sleek, black car gliding smoothly up the street, the kind of car he had only seen in magazines or on television, reserved for people who seemed untouchable, invincible. His heart thudded in his chest, a mix of curiosity and caution. Who could be driving this? Why here? Why now? The questions tumbled through his mind faster than he could answer them. He stepped outside, cautious but compelled, and froze. Standing there with a confidence that radiated even before he spoke was the stranger. But this stranger wasn't the man in tattered clothes he had helped 2 days ago. No, he was immaculate, dressed in a tailored suit that whispered wealth and power. His eyes, though kind, carried the weight of experience and authority. The teen's mouth went dry. Was this really the same man? How could someone who had seemed so desperate and fragile suddenly be here, commanding attention without even trying? The stranger smiled, a knowing smile, and the teen felt a strange mixture of relief, disbelief, and anticipation. He had spent his last $10 on this man, the one he thought he was helping out of sheer human kindness. And now, standing before him, this man exuded success and influence in a way that made the teen's recent sacrifices feel simultaneously foolish and monumental. But as the man stepped closer, he spoke, and the world seemed to pause for just a moment. "I remember you," he said calmly, his voice smooth, steady, imbued with authority. "You helped me when I needed it, without hesitation. You gave even when you had nothing left to give. Most people won't do that. Most people think of themselves first, considering what they'll gain and how it affects them. But not you." The teen swallowed hard. His chest tightened. Could it be true? Could his simple act of generosity have meant something to this stranger, someone so obviously powerful and accomplished? Doubt and hope collided inside him. Was this really a reward or just a cruel joke of fate? The stranger continued, his gaze unwavering, holding a quiet intensity that seemed to penetrate every corner of the teen's uncertainty. "I've been looking for people like you," he explained. "People whose kindness isn't transactional, whose compassion isn't conditional. I was testing and observing to see who would act from the heart, rather than for recognition or reward. And you stood out." The teen's mind raced. Testing? Observing? What did that even mean? Yet, even as confusion threatened to cloud the moment, a spark of pride ignited. His small act, the $10 that had seemed so insignificant and perilous, had been noticed by someone who mattered, someone whose judgment carried weight. The man's explanation unfolded further, and each word seemed to unravel the tension that had gripped the teen for the past 2 days. "I needed to see who would do the right thing when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. You did. That choice. It defines you." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. The teen felt his stomach flutter, a mixture of relief, astonishment, and burgeoning excitement. He had worried for 2 days that he had acted foolishly, that his generosity had been wasted, that he had gambled his survival for nothing. And now, standing here, those fears began to dissolve under the warmth of validation and recognition. But the stranger didn't stop there. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes glinting with the kind of knowledge reserved for those who have seen the world bend and shift. "I want to help you. I want to open doors that you might never have imagined. Not because I expect anything in return, but because you've proven that character and courage still exist, even in the smallest of acts. That's rare. That's invaluable." The teen's jaw dropped. This wasn't a handout. This wasn't a fleeting moment of charity. This was an opportunity, a bridge from the life he had known, one of scarcity and struggle, to a life where potential could finally meet possibility. The magnitude of the moment washed over him in waves. It was surreal, almost dreamlike, the kind of encounter that rewrites the narrative of your life in a single chapter. He could see the irony now. The $10 he had feared losing, the very thing that had caused nights of hunger and worry, had become the catalyst for transformation. Every pang of hunger, every whispered doubt, every critical word from friends or family, all of it had led him here. He realized that sacrifice, when rooted in sincerity, never goes unnoticed. Even when it feels invisible, it leaves an imprint, one that powerful forces in the world can recognize, honor, and reward. The stranger gestured toward the car. "I want you to come with me," he said. "There are experiences, opportunities, and mentorships that you deserve, and I can help guide you through them. Not everyone gets this chance, and not everyone would even take it if it were offered. But I see something in you, something that can't be taught, something innate. You've earned this." The teen felt his chest swell with a mixture of humility and exhilaration. The world he had known, the world of scarcity, compromise, and limitations, seemed to stretch and expand before him. The air itself felt different, charged with possibility, with hope, with the promise that courage and kindness can indeed ripple out and return in ways unimaginable. He hesitated for a heartbeat, glancing back at his modest home, at the worn shoes, at the empty pantry, and then back at the stranger. Every fear and doubt that had plagued him in the past 48 hours seemed to dissipate under the weight of this moment. This was more than luck. This was recognition. This was validation that integrity and empathy are forces with the power to alter destiny. And as he stepped toward the car, toward the unknown yet undeniably transformative path ahead, he felt something shift inside him. He felt the quiet thrill of stepping into a life shaped not merely by circumstance, but by deliberate, compassionate choice. The stranger smiled again, a subtle, knowing curl of lips that suggested both pride and anticipation for what was to come. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Remember, the choices you make when no one is watching are the ones that define you. That $10 you gave, it wasn't just money. It was a declaration of who you are, and that declaration has brought you here." The teen nodded, speechless, yet fully aware that his life had already begun to change. The fear, the hunger, the doubt, they were now chapters in a story that would lead to something extraordinary. As he slid into the car, the leather cool beneath his hands, he looked at the stranger. He realized the truth. Acts of kindness, no matter how small or seemingly inconsequential, carry power beyond imagination. They can rewrite stories, reshape destinies, and open doors that fear and scarcity would have kept locked forever. And in that moment, the teen understood that generosity is never a loss. That courage always has a payoff, and that even in a world that often seems indifferent, goodness finds a way to return to those who dare to live it. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving behind the streets of struggle, the echoes of doubt, and the heavy burden of survival. Ahead stretched possibility, opportunity, and a future forged from the simple, brave act of giving when it mattered most. The teen could barely comprehend what he was hearing. Words tumbled out of the stranger's mouth, each one heavier than the last, each one reshaping the contours of a life that had felt confined to struggle and scarcity. "I want to pay for your tuition," the man said, his voice steady but warm, carrying the kind of weight that made promises feel like destiny rather than mere possibility. "I want to connect you with opportunities, mentorship, and guidance so that the obstacles you face don't define the limits of your future." For a moment, the teen couldn't speak. His hands trembled, his chest tightened, and the reality of his situation seemed almost surreal. Could this really be happening? After nights of hunger, days spent worrying over every penny, and the crushing weight of uncertainty, could this one encounter truly open a door that had seemed permanently closed? Tears pricked at his eyes, unbidden and unstoppable. He had dreamed of education, of growth, of the chance to step into a world where potential could finally be nurtured rather than constrained. But dreams had always felt distant, almost cruelly unreachable. Tuition bills, the relentless pressure of providing for himself, and the constant reminder that the world didn't owe him anything had made hope feel like a fragile luxury. And yet here was a man, someone who had tested him, observed him, and recognized his character, offering him not just assistance, but a pathway to unlock the future he had only imagined in fleeting late-night fantasies. The contrast between the despair of yesterday and the hope of this moment was almost overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion threatening to sweep him off his feet. He felt gratitude ripple through him, raw, and unfiltered. It wasn't just gratitude for the financial support. However, that was monumental. It was gratitude for being seen, for being acknowledged as someone whose choices and integrity mattered. The teen had always understood kindness in theory, but to experience it as a transformative force was entirely different. His mind raced, recalling the countless times he had made sacrifices, small and large, often unnoticed, often doubted. And now one seemingly simple act, the $10 he had given without expectation, had triggered a cascade of opportunity. He realized that generosity isn't a gamble. It's an investment in the unseen, the intangible, and sometimes the universe has a way of paying dividends in ways that surpass imagination. The stranger continued, outlining the mentorship, the introductions to influential figures, the training opportunities, and the financial support that would ensure the teen could focus entirely on learning, growing, and pursuing his passions. Each word, each promise, was a seed planted in the fertile ground of his ambition, a blueprint for a future he hadn't dared to sketch in such vivid detail. The teen's mind oscillated between disbelief and elation. Could he truly step into a life unshackled by the limitations that had defined his world? Could he truly accept a future that was waiting, fully formed, simply because he had chosen empathy over self-preservation? As the reality began to sink in, tears streamed freely down his face. They were tears of relief, of validation, of profound emotional release. He had carried the weight of poverty, responsibility, and skepticism for so long that the sensation of hope was almost foreign, yet intoxicating. He realized in a quiet, transformative way that courage and kindness have their own form of intelligence, a power to catalyze change that money, privilege, or status alone cannot replicate. And as he stood there, absorbing the enormity of the offer, he felt an internal shift, a reconfiguration of identity. He was no longer simply a teen scraping by. He was a young man with a purpose, recognized and supported by someone who understood the value of integrity and vision. The stranger's words resonated beyond the immediate offer. "Remember," he said gently, "the choices we make in small moments often echo louder than we anticipate. Your decision to help me, even when you had nothing to give, revealed a strength and a character that can't be taught. That's why I'm here, to ensure that what you've shown isn't lost, but multiplied." The teen's heart pounded as the weight of this affirmation sank in. For the first time, he could see a life where his dreams were attainable, where the barriers imposed by circumstance could be dismantled through support, guidance, and the recognition of his inherent worth. Hope was no longer an abstract concept. It was tangible, immediate, and profoundly empowering. He thought of the nights he had spent lying awake, wondering how he would survive, whether he would be forced to abandon his aspirations for the sake of mere survival. And now, the stark contrast was breathtaking. From despair to possibility, from scarcity to opportunity, the transformation was almost too vast to process. Yet, within him, a quiet confidence began to take root. A sense that his actions, even the smallest ones, had significance, that integrity and empathy could genuinely alter the trajectory of a life. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating, a fusion of gratitude and determination that propelled him forward. As the conversation continued, the stranger outlined the practicalities: enrollment in a respected institution, direct mentorship in skills and professional development, exposure to networks that would have seemed unattainable mere days ago. Every detail was meticulously designed to ensure that the teen could focus entirely on growth, unhindered by financial strain or societal limitations. The teen listened, absorbing each point, imagining the doors that were now opening and feeling the raw excitement of a life suddenly infused with possibility. He understood that this was more than assistance. It was a launchpad for transformation, a rare and invaluable chance to step fully into the potential he had always harbored, but never had the resources to explore. Tears of disbelief and joy mingled as he processed the offer, each emotion a testament to the immense shift occurring within him. He recalled the fear, doubt, and hunger that had defined the past days, and now contrasted them with the overwhelming sense of validation, empowerment, and hope that filled every corner of his being. The lesson was clear and profound. Courage, compassion, and selflessness, even in the smallest gestures, hold the power to create ripples far beyond what the eye can see. That single act of giving $10, when it seemed he had nothing to spare, had initiated a chain reaction that culminated in this transformative moment. The teen could scarcely believe the reality unfolding before him. He had moved from a world of scarcity to one of opportunity, from fear to empowerment, from uncertainty to clarity. Gratitude coursed through him in waves, a mixture of humility and exhilaration, as he realized that kindness and integrity had tangible, transformative consequences. This was more than a chance. It was a validation that life rewards those who act with courage, empathy, and heart. And as he embraced the stranger's offer, he felt the full weight of potential settle over him, a profound recognition that the future was no longer something to be endured. It was something to be seized, crafted, and cherished. The transformation was complete. From the fear of giving his last $10 to the overwhelming joy of having his tuition covered and future unlocked, he experienced an emotional catharsis that few ever encounter. The despair of the past had been replaced with hope. The limitations of circumstance had been replaced with possibility. And the weight of doubt had been replaced with the empowering knowledge that one act of courage and kindness could redefine an entire life. In that moment, tears flowed freely, not from sadness, but from the awe-inspiring realization that generosity, integrity, and empathy are forces that can reshape destiny. The teen had crossed the threshold from survival to empowerment, from limitation to opportunity. In doing so, he embodied a timeless truth. What we give selflessly often returns in ways beyond imagination, opening doors, unlocking dreams, and creating a future previously thought impossible. The teen sat quietly that evening, letting the events of the past few days settle around him like a soft but profound weight. He thought about the $10 bill that had once seemed so vital to his survival, so crucial to his immediate needs, and he smiled to himself, realizing how strange life could be. That small piece of paper, crumpled and worn from his constant handling, had felt like everything he owned. Yet, giving it away had opened doors he could never have imagined. How often do we let fear of scarcity dictate our choices, even when the smallest act of generosity could change the course of our lives? He thought about the hunger he had felt, the nights of worry and anxiety, the pangs that had reminded him constantly of what he lacked. He understood that true abundance isn't measured by what we hold, but by what we are willing to share. Looking back, he saw the clarity in the moments that had followed his choice. Doubt had gnawed at him. Friends and family had questioned his sanity, and even he had wondered if he had made the gravest mistake of his young life. Yet, in that uncertainty, there had been a quiet strength building within him, a resilience that came from choosing integrity over comfort, kindness over self-preservation. This reflection made him realize something profound. Acts of generosity are rarely wasted. They may not yield immediate results, they may even invite criticism or disbelief, but they plant seeds that grow in unseen ways, often far beyond the imagination of the giver. That $10 had become more than currency. It had become a symbol, a testament to the power of choosing empathy even when survival is at stake. It was a reminder that the universe often has its own way of rewarding courage and heart, in forms both tangible and transformative. He thought of the stranger, now revealed as a philanthropist, a mentor, someone whose influence could alter the trajectory of his life. The initial shock of seeing him arrive in a sleek car, impeccably dressed, and offering opportunities that had seemed unattainable, had been a moment of pure disbelief. But now, with a little distance and reflection, the teen understood that it wasn't luck or coincidence. It was the alignment of character and choice. The stranger had recognized something in him, something rare: selflessness, honesty, and courage. That recognition wasn't merely validation. It was a mirror showing him the potential that had always existed, but had been obscured by circumstance. And in that reflection, he saw the truth. Sometimes, the smallest gestures are the most revealing, and they often ignite a chain of events that reshape entire lives. It was as if the $10 had been a key, unlocking not just a door, but a series of opportunities that would have otherwise remained invisible. He pondered the broader lesson, one that transcended his personal experience. How many times had he, or someone he knew, hesitated to give because the cost seemed too high, the risk too great, or the return uncertain? We measure generosity in terms of what we lose, forgetting that what we give can carry far more weight than we imagine. That simple act, small in appearance, had created ripples that reached beyond his understanding, affecting not only him but others who would benefit from the mentorship, guidance, and eventual contributions he would be able to make in the future. It was a lesson in the quiet power of kindness, that even the smallest decision to act with empathy can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we cannot always foresee. And perhaps most importantly, it taught him that our true worth is reflected not in what we hoard, but in what we courageously share. Sitting there, he smiled again, realizing the depth of transformation that had occurred within him. It wasn't just about the financial help or the mentorship. It was about the belief that generosity is meaningful, that acts of courage and kindness are never wasted, and that the values we uphold even in the smallest moments define the trajectory of our lives. He understood now that living generously is both an investment in others and in oneself. Each choice to give, to support, to uplift, carries with it the potential for profound change. And while he had initially worried that giving away his last $10 would leave him vulnerable, he now saw it as the catalyst that had launched him toward opportunity, purpose, and a future filled with possibility. In that recognition, fear transformed into empowerment, scarcity into abundance, and doubt into unwavering confidence. He wanted others to understand this truth, to feel the weight and potential of their own choices. How often do we overlook the power of small gestures? A smile, a kind word, a helping hand, or even something as seemingly minor as $10 given without expectation. All of these are seeds capable of changing not only someone else's path, but also our own. The teen realized that generosity is a dialogue with the universe. What we offer sincerely and selflessly often returns in ways we cannot predict, enriching both the giver and the recipient. His story, he understood, was not extraordinary because of the money involved. Still, because of the courage, empathy, and humanity it represented. It was a reminder that greatness is often found in small, deliberate acts of kindness, and that our character is revealed in how we respond when the choice to give is most difficult. In closing, he reflected on the moment when the $10 left his hand, and how it had transformed every aspect of his life. It was no longer just a story of survival. It was a story of vision, of hope, of the tangible and immediate impact of compassion. He wanted every viewer to grasp this. The power to influence the world in meaningful ways lies within each of us, often in the moments we least expect. That $10 wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one filled with opportunity, guidance, and the unfolding of potential that could have never existed without the courage to act. Generosity, he realized, is not measured by size, but by intention, integrity, and willingness to act when it matters most. And so he ended his reflection with a thought he hoped others would carry forward. Your smallest acts of kindness, performed without expectation, hold the power to reshape lives, including your own. The universe notices. People notice. And sometimes, what you give freely comes back in ways more extraordinary than you could ever imagine. So take that step, make that choice, offer what you can, even when it feels risky or insufficient. That $10 became more than money. It became a lifeline, a testament, a spark that ignited possibility. What could your act of generosity ignite today? Believe in kindness, act with courage, share without hesitation, and watch as the ripples transform not just the world around you, but the very trajectory of your own life. At Hidden Struggles, we go deeper, where emotion meets evidence and drama reveals the system. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.